The Gardena Cinema was previously built as the Park Theater, and it was built by the Grand Theaters, and they were trying to find another location to build the theater, and they picked this spot. And Gardena actually had another theater in town, and this was the second theater in town to be built. The theater was built to be a first-run theater, and over the course of a few decades evolved into a second-run theater with like double features, and eventually it was owned and operated by an Italian couple by the name of Joe and Mary Donato, and they operated as a second-run theater. Joe would have monthly raffles or quarterly raffles to like give away prizes like stereos, bicycles, things of that nature that people could get excited about at the time. And when my dad took over the business in 1976, he just continued the tradition. One of the reasons why second run was better than a first run is because they could basically change movies every week and you could show double features, whereas with the first run movie, you wouldn't be able to do something like that. You'd have to hold on to the film for a longer period of time, and maybe the neighborhood had already seen the movie and they want to see a different movie, so second run might have seemed a little bit better. My parents, by the time they took over from Joe and Mary Donato, they just continued with the second run format, but eventually the neighborhood started changing, and my mom and dad saw that there was a demographic that was being ignored. With the Hispanic population growing in the area, my parents converted the theater from a second-run Hollywood movie theater to a Spanish language movie theater. Like even the Rhodium down the street, the Rhodium Drive-In, they were doing once a week on Wednesdays Spanish language movies, and it was selling out. They changed it to Teatro Variedades, which means variety theater in Spanish. Entertainment promoters that would bring very famous people from Mexico City to Los Angeles to perform. And so you would have very famous people like Vicente Fernandez and Pedro Infante Jr., Yolanda Del Rio, La India Maria. All of these were like, if you have Spanish-speaking parents, you know who these people are, because this is what you grew up with, this is what your parents grew up with. And it was a very exciting time. My parents had no idea that this was gonna happen. And my dad just kept selling tickets even after he ran out of seats. The fire marshal had to come and say, hey, you can only sell tickets the number of seats that you have. So I got involved with the theater in 1996. I spent a year living in DC working for the Arena Stage. My parents were struggling because they were taken advantage of by unscrupulous people who defrauded them. They didn't have good command of the English language, and they had legal issues, they had financial issues. When I came home, it was my job to sort of untangle and undo a lot of the bad things that had happened to them. I came back after my fellowship at Arena Stage and decided to help my parents with the movies. We were gonna reopen the movie theater, and I suggested that we go with first run rather than doing second run movies, double features like back in the 50s. In 1996, you already had like VCRs, and I don't remember if DVDs came out by that time, but DVDs and all of that secondary market for films had a deep impact on the second run film industry. So I just felt that at the time it made more sense to open up as a first run movie theater so we could get brand new movies off the pop and attract larger audiences, larger number of people. So by 1996, we reopened, and I remember at the time I was trying to figure out what movie to open with, but there was not very much because it was a slow period of the year, and we opened with How to Make an American Quilt. Yeah, I remember we sat there and we had one customer the whole day on the first day that we reopened. And I said, well, can only go up from here. So home video, what I found was originally we were a little bit disturbed by it, a little bit afraid. You know, all these, secondary markets for films came out. It was a little threatening to a movie theater. But what I found was the people who love movies and watch movies all the time go to the movies and then they rent movies at home. So like they're constantly absorbing movies. So I found that there was a synergistic effect. And so local video rental places, we would have kind of a professional courtesy where we would allow the video store owners to come watch a movie at our theater, and they would allow us to leave flyers of our movie theater, the new movie of the week, at their place of business, because they had more frequent foot traffic with respect to people who would watch movies, rent movies all the time. We went from 35 millimeter film to digital projection in 2013. And we didn't do it voluntarily. I mean, we waited until the very last moment we could hold out on film. And then I was told that the studios were no longer going to be making film for new releases, and that if I wanted to show new movies, I would have to have a digital projector. So it was a huge expense for us. It was a very stressful time. After that, we closed down for like 2 months because we had to do construction on the projector room. We had to bring in the new equipment. It had to be installed properly. There had to be testing to make sure everything was working properly. It was just a lot of work. And I remember the first digital movie that we showed was Frankenweenie. We almost didn't show it on opening night because I wasn't sure if our equipment was going to work. But I was very sensitive to the fact that many theaters did not survive that. And once we went digital, I will tell you, I couldn't believe how much easier it was. 35 millimeter, you actually had to go upstairs, rethread the projector, and then when the movie time arrived, you had to actually go back upstairs and push a button to start the projection. But now, with digital, you basically set it on a schedule, you put in the times that you want the movie to start, and it just starts on its own. I mean, I know that 35 millimeter is kind of in vogue right now with younger people because it's, they don't remember it. They didn't grow up with 35 millimeter, so it's kind of a cool thing to go watch a 35 millimeter film. But the truth is that number one, it was a pain to build up. No matter what, it took at least 2 to 3 hours to build up because you're talking about, winding, reels of film and making sure that they were spliced together in the correct order. And sometimes if you put it in the incorrect order, you were screwed because the movie didn't go in the order it was supposed to be in. And to cut it down, when you were done with it, you would have to break it down, and it would take no less than an hour to break down a movie, even if you had fast equipment that would wind up quickly. For many, many years, close to 2 or 3 decades, you had an exclusive window of about 90 days, on average about 90 days, of it being in the movie theaters only before it would be on video or any other secondary market. And of course it would take about a year for it to show up on TV. So, these were markets that were sort of set in stone. They were understood by everyone in the industry, and the pandemic turned it all upside down. I just remember my mom and dad watching the news every day and saying, there's something going on with this flu, and maybe we should close, maybe we should consider closing. And I remember, we opened Onward Disney's Onward, and it opened on a Friday. And then on Saturday, it wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. And by Sunday night, we were very concerned. I remember my family having a very serious discussion Sunday night saying, maybe we should not open as of Monday. And so we made the decision to close. It was the 15th of March, and we closed on the 16th. We decided not to open on the 16th. And by the 17th, the city of LA had already ordered that all movie theaters close. We didn't know what was going to happen after that. Honestly, we thought it was just going to be 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month at the most. Nobody knew it was going to be 2 years. Since people weren't going to the movie theaters, since they were closed, the film distributors decided to just send stuff straight to streaming at the chagrin of movie theater owners. I mean, movie theater owners were very unhappy with what the studios were doing, and the studios probably could have communicated better that it was not necessarily a long-term thing that they were doing, but they didn't know either. Nobody knew what the future held. So when movie theaters started reopening again, studios started to realize, hey, this movie theater model is actually much better than streaming because we're getting revenue per head as opposed to revenue per household. So the movie studios, you've got the die-hard original movie studios. They're the ones who ended up coming back to the movie theaters and saying, you know what, the movie theater model, it works. It works. We're back. And by the time my mother passed away, which is only, she passed away on Mother's Day of 2022. So by that time, COVID, everything was lifted. All the mask requirements were gone. People were starting to gather again. Everyone was already vaccinated. Even my mom was vaccinated, so everybody was vaccinated, so there were no more issues and you could gather. Movie theaters were already open by that time. We chose not to open. We held off on opening the movie theater, but that's because it was a family decision and my mom was ill. So we didn't do that, but yeah, it's definitely a very unsettling period of time with a lot of hope because we thought, oh, it's going to be over soon. We were hoping that it would be over soon. But when it just kept dragging on after the 6-month mark, that's when you really start to panic. You're thinking, how do I continue paying my bills? The answer was the drive-in, so we opened up the drive-in and we were able to continue operating as a drive-in. And it was a good time for us because honestly, there was nothing to do. No restaurants, no theaters, no place was open except drive-ins. And honestly, because of the cost of real estate in Los Angeles, all the drive-ins were gone in Los Angeles. There were only a handful. So we were able to go to the city of Gardena and ask them for a conditional use permit, a temporary conditional use permit to operate as an outdoor movie theater. They allowed it, they granted our request, and we were able to operate as a drive-in cinema, and lots of people showed up. We sold out several shows. That parking lot probably holds somewhere around 65 to 75 vehicles, and we sold out a lot of shows. I mean, we were originally only going to do one show a night, and we ended up during October. We were so busy during October, and October's normally a very slow time of the year. October, we were doing 3 shows a night. I was here until 2, 3 in the morning because we showed a midnight show, and there were 30 cars in the parking lot or whatever, So people wanted some place to go. They just didn't have any place to go, and they were just dying to get out because everybody was cooped up at home for so long. So with respect to the future, it's all up in the air, to be honest with you, because my mother's passed away. My father's 82 years old. I don't know how much more time I have left with him. So for me, the theater is really not of utmost importance anymore. It's really spending time with my dad. My dad has asked me to sell the theater so that I could devote my time to him without being concerned about overhead expenses and making sure that, you know, the theater is being maintained properly. And he used to maintain it. He's an electrical engineer, so he fixed everything. There isn't a spot in this theater that my dad's hand has not touched. But in the meantime, I do still love the theater. It was my mother's dream. You know, she always wanted to own a movie theater, and she loved this theater. She loved all of our patrons. They brought her so much joy whenever they came, and she probably saw 4 generations of patrons. I mean, she served customers as kids who grew up and brought their own kids, and later on brought their grandkids, who then brought their own kids. And when she passed away, I really was very touched by the outpouring of comments that were sent to me, or, you know, the people who showed up at her funeral. We actually had her funeral at the cinema. So that was really nice to be able to meet with people one last time at her passing, at her funeral. I just figured we'll just keep running it, you know. It's one of the few, it has not gone beyond me that this is probably a dinosaur, and we're probably one of the last standing ones. You know, a handful of last standing dinosaurs. Single screen, still operating movie theaters are few and far between in the county of Los Angeles, you know, let alone in all of the South Bay area. We are the only movie theater in the city of Gardena, and it's not lost upon me. So I do appreciate it, and I don't want to, you know, I want to honor that. I don't want to erase that or get rid of it. So as long as we still own the theater, I will try to keep operating it as best I can. What helps is that I get a lot of location shoot requests, because there aren't too many theaters that look like our theater anymore. And so people want to do their music video here, or they want to shoot a commercial here, or they might want to do a magazine spread here. You know, they might even want to do, you know, a feature film shoot here. So, you know, that really kind of keeps me going, because when I get those projects that come in, number one, it's very exciting to see like what projects we can be part of. Number two, it's a nice cash infusion to get compensated for location shoots, and that helps me pay the bills and makes up for the times that are very, very slow, where I'm not able to make enough money to pay the bills. So we survive by default. I mean, it's because it was the only asset that my parents owned and had, besides the house that they lived in. And it was do or die, really. I mean, if it means putting food on the table, you're gonna do what you need to do to keep the business going, even if it means, you know, using your kids as free labor. You know?